The miracle of breath. So, breathing is the physical sensation by which our body connects with our mind and our emotions, and by which we can make the ideas and the emotions in the music cohesive. And it's the only action we can do that is both voluntary and involuntary. So it's interactive. And our minds have this agility and ability to communicate in real time with our bodies, and that is the miracle. When we choose how to breathe with a phrase, we are also choosing what musical elements to highlight. And the other way around, after we analyze different elements, we can ride our breath to move between the layers of information. So breathing is like a glue that holds different aspects of music making and listening together into one bundle of expression. So a little context about where I'm coming from personally. The larger context is that I think in the last few years we've seen a lot of great groundbreaking work on emotions becoming more accessible and more well known. And now I'm hearing a lot of things about awareness of physical intelligence and what our bodies can teach us, how we can be better listeners to our bodies. Breathing for regulation through meditation, and for high efficiency for runners and athletes. I am, however, talking about breathing for expression. And breathing for expression, I think, is still very much under the radar. And I think breathing can do all those three things that I just mentioned. And the excitement for me is to find more options of breathing patterns to improve our listening agility of what to focus on in a moment, which then opens up our awareness of emotions and the amount of possibilities in a moment. Not locking into a trance rhythm or how runners synchronize their stride and their breathing pattern, and not locking into the breathing with downbeats all the time, but involving connecting our mind, body, heart to be spontaneous and creative, and synchronizing and signaling with breath cues to other performers, to the audience, as performers, as listeners, and as analysts. And I'm sure that you're thinking, well, if you use your breath to play the instrument, this is a moot point. But, we all mentally engage and imagine what we are expressing before we can do it. And so I believe that the mental practice, the mental strength and agility is all, at least half of what we do as musicians. So in that sense, when we're score studying, we all are feeling somehow the breath, whether it's very small or really expressive. So the personal context to this is that I first discovered breath through my own recovery. When I was at Juilliard, I had this really traumatic shoulder injury, and that it became chronic over time. And the harder I tried to work myself out of the injury, the worse my condition became. And I was following prescriptions by medical people, great ideas, but I wasn't testing them with what my body was telling me, which was stop trying so hard and stop. And had I listened to my lack of mobility in my lungs and the constant frozen stance, then I would have been able to better respond. And had I heard about physical intelligence back then, I would have had a little more confidence in my body's intuition. Second area of influence is dance class. So the way that dancers move and think about alignment and extension. I've written a couple blogs on that on my website if you're interested. I've taken a lot of dance to understand how they think about kinesthetic motion, energy. The third area is performing with a previously compromised body really required adjustments. And I started discovering that breath had a lot of power and it could make up for my lack. And the fourth area is teaching. I find it really important to teach bundling a lot of information into one breath that makes sense. And it's also great for performance anxiety, but that's a totally different topic. So today let's talk and work through why we should use our breathing as musicians on these excerpts, and my interests lie mainly in how we use breath and performance to actualize our analysis, but today I'm going to be trying to focus on how we breathe in performance to inform and confirm our analysis. So if you look at the strategies on the handout, the first is to understand where each phrase is going, where it's going towards, in terms of musical gestures and time durations, and to test whether our analytical theories are actually audible when we listen to the music. Can we make it communicated to the audience without a verbal explanation or program notes? And if the composer heard it, then if the composer heard it in his mind, then we should find a way to reproduce that. But if he did not hear it, then we are just maybe thrusting irrelevant ideas on the score. So it's a kind of a test for me. The second part of my strategy is to explore a fuller range of possible perspectives. So a fuller awareness of our body, mind, heart connection and of other people's breath patterns. The third strategy is to use the creative process of choosing which layer to breathe with at specific points of the music as a disciplined way to prioritize the analyzed musical elements for the purpose of actualizing the whole music in real time. So is it actually humanly possible to deliver these ideas and concepts poetically beyond hitting the targets in issues of, does virtuosity become absurd and anti-musical at some point? How do we get the agility to play with the information and not get stuck on one pattern? How do we allow it to all be automatic so that we can zoom in on spontaneous hyper details? How do we deal with hyper complicated rhythms like Ligeti or Carter so that it feels like gestures rather than mathematical equations? Okay, so my final thoughts are that we as human beings are designed to breathe with a pulse, but we're also really spontaneous and unpredictable, and we can overlap breath layers. We can inhale 10 times without an exhale. We can do so many different patterns, and we can invite ourselves to experience something differently every time. And so when we are experiencing this, a lot of people say, well, what's the difference between doing it naturally and then doing it the way that I'm talking about, intentionally? And so the thing is that if we think about everything we do, it's not natural to practice. It's not a natural human thing, but we do it for extra insights and extra control. And that's what we're gaining when we're thinking about it in a new way. And some intuitive performers will breathe all the stuff we're talking about without thinking, and it feels alive. But then most of us, I think, even including really, really intuitive ones, we would discover more if we breathed with it in different layers and experienced it in different ways. So my interest is really to increase the agility of our analysis and our expression. And the composers who wrote these tonal classical pieces, they were performers, and I thought they envisioned music in a certain way. And when they notated it, it was, I think, with the concern of how the music would be performed, and not in an abstract notation, but in the sound. And so for me, I want to avoid going into a default of thought patterns or emotional patterns and choose some disciplined exploration of the different options there. And analysis, I think, it's not like a static truth. It's this dynamic underpinning of live performance. And performance is not just about being individualistic, but it's a creative process by which we curate what part of this complex analysis to highlight and to communicate what we experience ourselves. And even with mental practicing, mental listening requires our interpretive decisions. So breath is a miraculous transportation between the two worlds, from an idea into a manifestation, from knowledge into an experience. And I hope it becomes a tool for you towards just a greater awareness and a more cohesive experience of music. And we didn't really have a chance today to play jumping in between the layers, but say you wanted to show the tension, but then you also wanted to show the rising interval of the melody, and then you also wanted to show that the bass was being delayed. I mean, all those things, when you put it together into one composite gesture, I think it needs to somehow have a priority. Like, we need to analyze what is it about our analysis that we want to show foreground, background, and then how does it all come together. So it's like that three-dimensional aspect of music, I think, needs to be bundled in something. And so the breath is the way that I find is the best way to direct everything to an arrival point and to make sense of what's happening.